what I wanted to do, I think, just to start us off and just to get into making it conversational, and I thought I'd let you start in just reminiscing, just talking a little about that time from this point of view. The question that's always asked, I think, what was it about Hitler that drew you to him, and people like you, and the whole staff, and the people that he built up around him? If you start to speak, just reminiscing from your personal viewpoint about what it was, possibly as a young man, as the architect, up through the years. So why don't you just start about that, and then go up through your relations with him, about the turning point, about the time you were ill, about the time that you even thought of assassination, and possibly even about your final meeting. And as I say, we can fill in the gaps later on. So I kind of leave it to you.
You mean so 5 minutes, or how long?
About 5 minutes, yes.
5 minutes.
However long it takes.
He is a professional.
Yes, is he ever. Give him the word count.
So then we can start.
Yes, any time and at any point. And I think it's just a good starting place, really.
Yeah. It's the most difficult.
Would you prefer to start somewhere else?
I think Hitler was really a fascinating man. In history, we have several persons of importance which are well known for their fascination. I remember Savonarola in Firenze, who has had in his hands a whole town. Nowadays, by the means of the mass communication, it is possible to a man with the gifts of Hitler to get in his hands a whole nation. And me too. I was fascinated by Hitler when I saw him first in a meeting, as I described in my book, with students. After this meeting, in which he was hailed by all the students, in which no opposition was to be remarked, I felt that Hitler will be the person who shall help Germany to get out of the difficulties in this time. This was 31. We had a great part of the population was without work. I, as an architect, had no hope ever to get any important errand. Then, 3 years later, I was already Hitler's architect, and there came a new thing which was conquering me and which was putting aside all the thoughts I should have had about Hitler's aims. This was that I was Hitler's architect, that in the age of 28 and 29 I got to design buildings of an importance which was unheard in this time in the whole world. Of course, this was such a temptation that it even was more than the fascination of Hitler's. The years passed, Hitler started his war. I was to be his Minister of Armaments, one of his choices, personal choices, which one couldn't understand, because I was only an architect, but I succeeded to my own surprise. The war was going worse and worse, and in the beginning of '44 I was very sick, probably sick by exhaustion. In this time I was sick in the sick bed for several weeks. I was put out of the influence of Hitler. And when I came back again in Hitler's environs, I saw the first time that he really looks ugly. I never have seen this before. But nowadays, I think this was a sign for a certain distance I have won against Hitler during my sickness. Shortly afterwards, after the invasion, Hitler ordered to destroy all the industry in France.
Camera. Okay, this is take number 2. I think if you just start with the when Hitler gave the orders, you know.
In September '44, Hitler gave the orders to destroy everything in Germany. In this time, the advance of the American and British troops was going so quickly that everybody thought that they will enter Germany and occupy Germany in a short time. Luckily enough for everybody concerned, even for the German people, the Americans and British stopped before the Siegfried Wall, the Siegfried Line, and I succeeded to convince Hitler that industry shouldn't be destroyed. But then in winter '44 to '45, there were other signs that Hitler really means something when he said the German people has no right to survive when the war is lost, because they lost the war. And during the Yalta conference, he gave strict orders to his press chief to attack and to insult those leading men in Yalta so much, to insult them so much that they will find it impossible to give any was heißt ein
What word?
Any quarter?
no,
I cut.
ja, ist besser.
Camera. Take number 3. Yeah, just start it again.
Hitler wanted, with the offense of the statesmen in Yalta, to prevent them to make any offer to the German people. I saw in this move of Hitler a sign that he wants to go to the bitter end, made a few memorandums, and those memorandums told him that the war is finally lost, and that the duty of him and of the government is only to try everything to ease the life of the German people after the lost war. When he got one of these memorandums in March 45, he got really furious, and he said again, and this is in one of the letters I wrote to Hitler, stated word by word, if the German people didn't win the war, that's no use to give them any chance to survive. Those who survive are only the weaklings. The brave ones will die in battle. I don't like to tell, but it's necessary to show my attitude in this time, that I was so despaired that I tried to kill Hitler. Of course, this plan can't be compared with those of the 20th of July 44, because they, in this time, wanted to do something fundamental. What I tried to do was only to escape a situation which was threatful. Hitler made strict orders again to destroy everything. I had hard arguments with him. Finally, he gave a bit in and gave me the right to fulfill his orders as I thought it right. Of course, I didn't do anything like that, and German industry wasn't destroyed by Hitler's orders. Now, the last weeks came, Hitler was a wreck, and I admit that now I had pity with this man who didn't deserve any pity and doesn't deserve it in any time, because for history he is one of the evils thing which happened. But I had pity with him personally, and I flew into Berlin when Berlin was almost encircled by the Russian troops with a small recognizer plane, and he was very icy when he saw me. I spoke lengthy with him, with Magda Goebbels, with Dr. Goebbels, with Bormann, and there were several exciting minutes when the news came that Göring was up to take government in his hands. All these things I saw and heard, But Hitler himself, he wasn't touched or moved by my gesture to see him a last time, and he said farewell to me in a very icy way. He even didn't give me any greetings to my family. This was the end of my connection with Hitler.
This is something I think that a great many of us have thought about, and certainly it's come up time and time again, and no one will ever be able to answer it, but I think perhaps if anyone could answer the question from the point of view of being very deeply involved, you probably could. What if Germany had won the war? What? Now, again, you know, you understand this is a supposition, but I've thought about it, and certainly you've thought about it a great deal. What would the world be like? What would have happened?
Of course, it's only a supposition that Hitler could have won the war because he couldn't. But if he would have won the war, in Germany, his government, his authoritarian system would have led to a sterile life. We must see that Hitler's success was only possible because he had with him the support of all those important leading men in the administration, in the so-called Wehrmacht, in the industry, which were already selected by a democratic system before 1933. I had the impression that those who were coming after this generation, which still was living before 1933, was chosen after principles which would have led to a sterile life of civilization, and that after 20 or 30 years, life in Germany would have been even more unbearable than it was during Hitler's time. Well, Hitler would have had also fulfilled all his plans in architecture. He would have made huge buildings. Those buildings which I planned frighten me a bit today, because they look as sterile as Hitler's, as a choice of Hitler's leading people. I think that, of course, Hitler, and that is not only thinking, that is proved, that Hitler would have made a great Germany. He was not only up to enlarge Germany to the Ural in Russia, but also to take great parts of France, of Belgium, into the hands of the German administration. And of course, what was left from Europe would only have been crippled, so crippled that there were no more.
What was 12 minutes back?
Tape number 2.
For better purpose.
Let's wait just 1 second. Camera, take number 4. Okay, so if you could start then about his plans for...
Hitler's plans to get the man who really rules Europe weren't certainly not the end of his aims. I tell in my book that one day he changed the sign which was on the cupola of the huge assembly hall in Berlin, in about 1,000 feet high. This sign was in these days before the First World War the emblem of the Hitler Party, an eagle which had in his claws the swastika. But he told me, change that, please. I want the eagle sitting on the globe. I was accustomed to many of such remarks of Hitler which I'm describing in my book, but this certainly was the most remarkable one because it showed, in my opinion, that he was clearly aiming to be the emperor of the world. And I think if he would have succeeded with his plans in this Second World War, in Europe, he would have made other steps towards the United States and other countries, together with the Japanese, of course.
Stop. The camera. Rolling. Speed. Take number 5. Okay, so after the Japanese.
Today, after the lost war, after 20 years imprisonment in Spandau, and after 3 years again here together with my family, of course I am shocked that I am able to tell you something like that. But I have to admit that in the time when I was working for Hitler as an architect, I was one of the people who was working with him to fulfill his aims. And my buildings would have been for times which would have come for hundreds of years, so he thought, the monuments to glorify this time of Hitler's. And then afterwards, when I was Minister of Armaments, I, of course, did everything to strengthen Hitler's armies and was now, on a more important point, the man who helped Hitler.
At Nuremberg, I think that was the statement at Nuremberg, the statement that you made that if Hitler had had a friend, you would have been it. You would have been that friend. Could you comment on that? Could you tell us a little about your personal relationship with the man?
In Nuremberg, I stated in the dock that... Es wird zu viel. Stopp einen Moment.
Camera, take number 6. If you could start again in Nuremberg.
In Nuremberg, in the dock, I made a statement. If Hitler would have had any friends, I would have been one of them. I wanted to say Hitler wasn't able to have any friends. I was close to him because he thought he's an architect too, and we were in some way, we were colleagues. And he admitted that, and he was discussing problems of the designs I brought to him as frank as it is under colleagues. But he never came closer than to a certain point. If there was reached a certain point, he shrank back and was again a stranger to me. I asked once in the Spandau prison Hess about his experiences with Hitler in this way, and he just said the same. He said, I never could get close to Hitler. He was always shunning away when I tried to be a good friend to him. It was obvious to me that Hitler couldn't have any friend. Probably he was not a character which could have any close contact to any human being. And probably this sign is one of the fundamental ones of his character.
Since you mentioned Hess, could we speak for a moment? Could you give me your feelings about the people around Hitler, about the personalities, about Hess? Why did Hess, for example, go to England? A little about Martin Bormann, for example, and I'm sure you've been asked at least 200 times, is Martin Bormann still alive? If you could just speak maybe for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes on the personalities around Hitler, what kind of, if Hitler had no friends, but on the other hand, if you could have been his friend had he had friends, what were the other people like as people? We only know them from the outside really as cardboard figures, as cutouts, you know, and at this point, after all the Hollywood movies, almost as cliches. So you probably, again, could speak to that point. So you could start really with Hess, if you like, or with Bormann. And again, in your book, Bormann is one of the people in your book that you mention really quite thoroughly. You didn't like him.
Oh, is it starting?
Yeah, you can start.
Yeah, it's all right.
He's been rolling. It makes it easier, you see.
Yeah. In Hitler has had in his time not a kind of a society as it is usual in other higher circles. The different important people around Hitler were surrounded by circles of their own. Hess had one Himmler had one of his own, Göring or Goebbels, and in the center of this circle was always the VIP. And this VIP, of course, he was flattered by his circle. That wouldn't have been the case if they had been all together, because then they would have been equals, but they didn't like anymore to be equals with somebody else. Hess, in his way, was a stubborn character. He was so stubborn that he was giving way to Bormann's ambition to get very close to Hitler, because he obviously didn't want to interfere. He was in some way obviously too proud to do it, or had some other reasons. But Bormann succeeded very skillfully to get more and more influence on Hitler, even in the time when he was only an official of Hess. I think that Hess felt that he was more and more put in the corner by Bormann and also by Hitler himself, which was in such ways very ruthless.
Roll camera. This is take number 7.
In September 45, few months after the Third Reich was broken down, I was brought to Nuremberg prison, and the trial started against 21 people who were the most important, considered the most important of Hitler's government or Hitler's party. There were discussions among ourselves how to start the defense and what to tell in the dock. It was obvious after a few of those discussions that almost everybody was aiming to show that he didn't do anything and that the responsibility for everything done was left to those who were already dead, like Hitler or Himmler, or absent like Bormann. I considered this a great mistake, and I thought that I have to stand for what was done in Hitler's regime. So I made, and I was the only one who did it, a statement to the court that I don't feel only responsible for all the orders in my ministry, but that I am responsible, in my opinion, for everything which happened during the time I was minister, that means during after 42, in Hitler's government. This included, of course, all the terrible crimes, the atrocities, which were witnessed in the Nuremberg trial.
Roll camera. Take number 8. Okay.
I made this statement to the judges of the International Tribunal because I feel that in every government, even in an authoritarian one, the leading people are responsible for everything which happens. They have the duty to see that things are going the right way and not the wrong way, and they can't say afterwards, well, I was under a dictator and I had just to do what he ordered. My lawyer was against it, because he said, if you're telling this, the tribunal sets your death sentence. But in this time, I was so shocked by everything which I heard in this tribunal, also accusations which were brought up by the prosecution and which were right, and nobody of the accused denied them, that I thought it's not important what happens to me, it's important to have made such a statement. I got a sentence of 20 years imprisonment. 7 of us who were surviving the trial were brought to Spandau in a prison where we kept alone, a huge place, and we were there in a few cells among hundreds of cells which were empty. I was more or less now in the situation to prove if my testimony of Nuremberg was right or wrong. That means I, in these 20 years, was still saying to myself that the sentence of 20 years deserves me right. Of course, that is a cruel thing to say when you think about the family which is separated from you for so many years, which are suffering. And so in some way I was a split person, because thinking of my family, I regretted very much to be in Spandau. Thinking only of myself, I said to myself, well, you should be here to give an example for future, and that is something worth it. I don't want to say anything about the legal point of the sentence, first of all, I don't understand anything of legal points, but also my lawyer and other lawyers told me that the sentence was too harsh. That's not the legal question, that's a question of morale, which also can be sentenced, and this question of morale, in my opinion, is I was failing so much in morality, in a strong viewpoint against everything which happened, that this alone gave the right to keep me in Spandau for 20 years. Well, this attitude helped me in some way to survive those 20 years, because certainly I felt easier than my colleagues which were kept in prison with me, which were always blaming the churches of having done them wrong. During this Spandau time, I was often thinking, what happens to my 6 children when they are thinking of the destiny, of the fate of their father. It was the danger that they were getting bitter about my fate, that they will turn to some rightish wing to
keep rolling. Roll camera. Take number 9.
I was afraid that my children are getting bitter about my fate, that they will perhaps turn to a rightish wing. So I made up my mind to write them my story as I saw it after so many years. Luckily enough, I found a good friend who promised me to take out of the prison all what I was writing in a secret way, because it wasn't allowed in this place to write his memoirs. And I myself didn't think about writing real memoirs which were published, but to write to my children, to show them how it happened, what happened, and what was my failure and my attitude in this time. And so, in hundreds and hundreds of pages, developed a kind of a discussion between my 6 children and myself about my past, which was certainly more frank than anything I should have written for publicity. In October '66,
roll camera. This is tape roll number 6, take number 25.
Hitler's Palais was about here in the background, you can't see it, and he went from here directly to the inside of this huge building to have his speeches, but now something happened which we didn't think about. In such a huge thing, the man who is in the middle and should be the most important is so minimized in scale that he is really a nothing. And of course, this Hitler didn't want and didn't like, but we couldn't change that. You see here the whole front of this building, and you see that at the top is this globe which Hitler ordered shortly before he ended the Second World War. Here we see only a detail of the corner. One can imagine how huge this cupola would have been. It was more or less like a small mountain, because the height of the whole thing was more than 1,000 feet. And here you see again the scale, because here in the foreground is the Brandenburg Gate. Here you see the Reichstag, that are human scales. And here is the inhuman scale.
Roll camera. Speed. Take number 26.
If I'm talking about inhuman dimensions, I mean also something else. Those buildings are inhuman in themselves. They are expressing the inhumanity of the whole system. And when we see nowadays this, what was left of Hitler's time, those photos and the sketches of him, then we can we have an example what he was like to do already before the war started, because those things are only understandable connected with his will to have to be a powerful man in Europe, and in the end to conquer Europe and to govern more or less the world. Hitler made designs himself. It's well known that he was aiming to be an architect, and that to the end of his life he always was complaining that he didn't succeed as an artist and an architect. One of the things he was drawing himself was his own house at the Obersalzberg. One day he asked me to give him the tools necessary for an architect, and with a ruler and was ist ein Winkel?
T-square.
Huh?
T-square.
Hmm?
T-square.
Yeah?
Like this.
Yeah, and the T-square, he was designing this thing, which is obviously what his house looked like afterwards. But with one thing is significant. He approached this building which he wanted to build, not as a normal architect, which is supposed to start some analysis and to approach the problem before it is decided from different angles. But obviously here we see one of the characteristic and fundamental lines of Hitler's character, that is, he couldn't approach from different angles. When he had once an idea, he followed this idea and had only small variations. We see here one sketch, we see here another one which is about the same, we see here a third one, here a fourth one, and here another one. And all are similar, all are only variations. When Hitler was designing his plans, he also had me ordered to build an atelier close to his Obersalzberg, so he could come and correct my plans, my designs, and this what this atelier looked like, designed by myself, and it's still there at Obersalzberg, as this photo which is done lately shows. Hitler was a fanatic as an architect, and he was, as an architect, fanatic with opera houses, which is also one of the typical things of his career. It's well known that he always was closely connected with everything dramatic, with Wagner, and with and what happened on the stage also was in some way emphasized in what happened in the Nuremberg rally. That was all one atmosphere of a drama. And he now was seeing to get ground plan of an opera, and I will show very shortly that again here, and these sketches are going over 3 or 4 years, always had the same idea. This is one idea of the foyer of an opera with a staircase. Here we see, some months later, it's still the same idea, only with small variations. Here it's not much different. Well, it's different because the staircase is now in the middle, but the whole thing is not much different. Here we see the same as before, and here we see it again, and this all is going on over years and years. And here there is not a new idea. And now here we come to one of the sketches he made over the plan of one architect, and we see the same thing again. But in this sketch we see something typical for Hitler, because we see that this man had willpower, that he was shaping out what he wanted and was doing it in blue and red pencil, and was always going closer to the form he wanted to have. I think this drawing shows as good as any photo of a speech that what Hitler, that the energy Hitler had, and the resoluteness he had in other things. This here are again two sketches for opera houses, and it's already getting more or less dull, that it didn't change at all. So we see that Hitler... No, we see now fertig.
Camera, this is take number 27.
So we have seen that Hitler was obviously not able to change his approach to problems when he had made up his mind. When I was 2-3 years later, after those sketches he had drawn, his Minister of Armament, I again had to find out that also the approach of him to military problems had the same lack, that he was always going on one side, in one way. He couldn't think, for instance, that a defense is very good in Russia. He always wanted to be on the offensive side, even when his general staff advised him to go into defense very early. And he couldn't think out of any other way but to lead his war to the bitter end.
Wait a minute.
Camera, take number 28.
Those buildings, they are the expression of Hitler's time. Every period, in my opinion, has in the artistic work the expression it deserves. And when I was designing for Hitler those buildings, I involuntarily gave my pencil to make monuments which were due to Hitler's aims, and not only to Hitler's aims, but also to the cruelties which were behind those aims. It's the same as we have it nowadays. Nowadays we are in the industrial age, and the buildings of nowadays are an expression of this age. It sounds ridiculous, but it is the truth that in some way Hitler, with his buildings, he wanted to buy the glory of the future of his empire in being by spending a few billions of marks, and to make the monuments to glorify his victories, which were far away, by erecting the monuments to praise the victories which weren't already fulfilled. Is that
good? Cut.
Rolle 3.
Roll number 3.
Roll number 3.
What is this? Camera, take number 10. Okay?
In October 66, after those 20 years in Spandau, I returned home in a family who was intact, and I felt after a very short time really at home. I was asking my children what they think about publishing all those letters sent to them about my life, because I thought that's only up to them to decide if these letters, which were in some way property of them, published and so given to the knowledge of wider circles, and as it looks now, to the whole world. Unanimously, they said, well, we agree with you because what you told us is important to know for other people too, because our future is...
Is he rolling?
Yeah, roll.
Speed.
Take number 11.
I asked my children what they would think about publishing what I wrote them, and unanimously they said, well, this would be good because we are young people and we think that this book will help our generation to learn something from the past which is important. I too think it's important what I wrote there in this book, and I'm very satisfied that in Germany the younger people are writing me many letters about the importance of this book.
Let's now go to Spandau, and incident, is that thunder I hear in the background?
Oh, sure.
Someone firing? Let's go to Spandau and a little bit of the routine of Spandau, and I think the area of this thing you mentioned family before. Now, you could not see your family except for, what was it, once every 6 months or something?
Months, but well, I explain it.
Yeah, okay, fine. So let's talk a little about the
Yes.
routine.
What was difficult? Most difficult?
Yes, the
in
most
prison?
difficult thing of 20 years, you had books, but you couldn't see your family, so, okay.
In Spandau, life wasn't too bad. Well, the first years we didn't get more food than the German population, and this was very little. But it improved. We had plenty to eat. We had all books we wanted. We could choose our books from the most important and largest library of the Berlin town, and it was allowed to me to choose more books from the library of the Technical University of Berlin. So I was able to read every day 4 or 5 hours, and my horizon was enlarging. I say this because my education was the education of a technical person. In my youth, I haven't had time to study philosophy or psychology or history, and probably this lack of knowledge was one of the reasons that I was a victim of Hitler's fascination. But now, with all those books reading, I was, so I see today, changing to another personality, and I could see things from another point of view than before. And this certainly helped to write the book as it is now. The worst in Spandau were the visits of the family. There was only allowed one visit every month, and a visit only of half an hour. And with my 6 children and my wife, it turned out that my children had only possibilities to see me once a year for half an hour, because the other 6 visits I had to use to speak with my wife and to discuss family matters which were urgent and which couldn't be discussed but in such a visit. To see a child only once a year is a tremendous effort, because entering the visit room, I am realizing that I am seeing this child only a year afterwards, and that the impression I giving to this child will last for 1 year. If I am failing in this visit, if I would have a breakdown, for instance, the child would have this impression for a whole year with him. Alone this, the thinking of such a possibility was already hindering that I could speak as I would have liked it, with in a frank, open manner. And I think for both parts, for the child and for myself, it was really something very hard to get through this half hour. When I was a free man again, I was astonished that also years of distance between my family and myself were put away in 1 second, and when we met each other the first time, it was as we never were separated.
You said it was very difficult, and I'm certain it was very difficult. What did you talk about in half an hour? Did you talk about terribly important things or terribly unimportant things, or in retrospect, how do you feel?
When I was talking this half an hour, I avoided all the topics which could have caused some emotional feeling, because I had the feeling that neither the child nor me could bear it. And of course this would have been the end of a conversation. So we were more or less talking nonsense. We were talking about school life and what I did in school, how I cheated my teachers and how they cheated their teachers and all such things. But we never got to the point which really was moving us, because it wouldn't have been possible to do it in this situation.
I'm going to switch to another subject, if I may, and ask you to comment on it. And it's again an area which you cover in the book, which you've been interviewed on before. I would like to talk about Hitler's reason, if you know it, if you can conceive it. What was Hitler's reason to start the extermination of the Jews? Why this particularly, and then what your feelings are about it, your feelings then, and you've mentioned it in the book, your feelings now about it, when you found out. I know this talk about someone saying, don't go up there because, if you could cover that subject in pretty much the same kind of monologue, I'd appreciate it. Starting perhaps with what you think Hitler's reason for the destruction of the Jews might have been. What first started this?
Hitler was hating the Jews, but he allowed them to go out of the country to 1939. When the war started, he made a speech in the Reichstag, and with this speech he already...
Okay, I'm sorry, I guess I should... Camera, this is take number 12.
Hitler always hated the Jews, and he made no secret about it. But to 1939, he was allowing them to go abroad, to leave the country. After the declaration of war, he obviously changed his attitude, because in the first Reichstag session after declaration of war, he said more or less that the Jewish people of Germany will be the hostages for everything which happens now to Germany. The things went on, the war was getting ruder and ruder, and I think, without really knowing it, that Hitler made true what he was explaining in this first session of the Reichstag, that the extermination of the Jews was one of the consequences he drew out of this war, who is going to be lost. I personally was warned by a friend of mine, a Gau leader of Upper Silesia, who told me once in my office that I never shall visit a concentration camp. He didn't mention the name, but as I know now, it must have been Auschwitz, because he said dreadful things are happening there. I was there, and I can't forget what I have seen. This moment, those few seconds in which this friend warned me were, in my opinion, nowadays, those seconds of my life in which I failed most. Because in those few seconds I shouldn't have shunned away, I shouldn't have put away what he told me in my mind, but I should have asked him, what you mean with that? What happened? What can you tell me? I didn't do that, and what would have been the next step, I didn't go to Hitler and ask him. What Hanke, this was the name of this friend, told me, what's up now here in such a concentration camp? I didn't do anything like that, and I think that when I put the responsibility of everything which happened in Hitler's time as a statement to me in Nuremberg trial, the cause of this statement was that I felt from this moment on guilty for all those terrible things which happened in Hitler's time, mainly the extermination of the Jews.
Cut. I want to go back and listen to that. Camera, take number 13.
It's difficult to write a book which is objective, because a writer has always his own point of view, and my point of view was inside the events, inside the government. To express this, I first had made up my mind to give the motto of the book to some words of Malraux, which he used in his Musée Imaginaire. Those words are saying, a fish swimming in his aquarium, he can't see the outside of his environments. And so it is with me. And also there is one point which I wouldn't like to miss. My point of view is in some way more favorable to Hitler than it should be, because I was his architect, and as his architect he certainly was to me more friendly, more charming than to other people who were working to him in important positions. I think I am covering a part of what was Hitler's personality. I was lucky enough to cover him from two angles, one of the artist, the other one as a minister. But there is not covered the most important angle, and this is the angle which was seen certainly by a man like Himmler. Because Himmler, he must have had his discussions with Hitler about the extermination of the Jews. He must have seen how cold-blooded Hitler ordered this, and how it was received when Himmler made certainly his reports about his successes in this question.
The thunder. Cut.
No, yeah.
You're probably out of tape just about, aren't you?